Hello, everyone, and welcome to our live chat today with Pam Jenoff, author of The Winter Guest. Thanks for joining us once again, Pam. It's great to have you on.
Thank you. Thank
We're
you.
really looking forward to chatting about your new book today. And as some of you may know, Pam is the celebrated author of The Commandant's Girl, which received a widespread acclaim. It earned her a nomination for the Quill Award and became an international bestseller. Today you can enter to win a copy of her latest release, so stop by BookTrib after the chat to win a copy of The Winter Guest. So, Pam, without further ado, before we start the questions and answers, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and The Winter Guest?
Sure. So this is my seventh book. I'm trying to keep track. I've written The Commandant's Girl, and my books are largely inspired by my years of working for the State Department in Poland on Holocaust issues back in the 90s. So lots of work with all the issues that remained from the Second World War, and I also became very close to many Holocaust survivors, and that really inspires all of my books. And my latest book, The Winter Guest, is the story of twin Polish sisters. They're 18 years old, and they're struggling to raise their younger siblings in a mountainous village during the war. One of the sisters, Helena, finds a downed American paratrooper, Jewish-American paratrooper, in the woods, and she secretly hides him and helps him back to health. And as you can imagine, this development just complicates their lives in all sorts of ways. And it was inspired by true events that I learned of both during my time at the State Department and also my time at the Pentagon before that.
Oh, that's fascinating. Janet has a question. She wants to know how much research went into this book before you started to write it.
It's an interesting question. So before I write the book, I have an idea or something that's sparking the book. So let me give you a couple of examples. This book, at the beginning, it's set the prologue set in the present day, and there's an elderly woman in a nursing home, and she's confronted by the police about some bones that have been found in rural Poland, dating back to the Second World War, and whether she knows anything about those bones. And that begins the story during the war. And that was inspired by when I was at the State Department. Many times bones were found in Poland from cemeteries that had been destroyed by the Germans, and those raise a lot of complicated issues. So that was one inspiration. The other inspiration was that when I worked at the Pentagon, I was able to travel to World War II commemorations around the globe for the 50th anniversary, and one of those was a cabin in the mountains in Slovakia, where a young Slovak girl had helped the partisans and the paratroopers. And so that was an inspiration. So some of what I do at the outset comes from these sort of ideas. And then the research really comes afterward. You don't have to research everything before you write something. You figure out, okay, I need a bit of research on this or a bit of research on that. So for me, some of it is instinctive and comes from my background, and then I have to dig deeper for the research. And then, of course, there's questions of what do you bend about history for the sake of fiction.
It's an interesting mix to draw from. Janet has an interesting question. She says, do you have a motto you live by when it comes to writing or just life in general?
Oh, goodness. A bunch of different things. But so my joking quote, in addition to writing, I'm a law school professor. Today was my first day of classes, and I have 3 preschoolers. And so I like to say I do too many things, but none of them well. But that's just a joke. Really, my favorite quote, my favorite motto comes from Anne Lamott. And she said, before children, I couldn't write if there were dirty dishes in the sink, and after children, I could write if there was a corpse in the sink. And I think that's so true. I think I can write anywhere. So it's just sort of an every damn day kind of thing.
Awesome. Emily has a question about the main character. She says, an 18-year-old girl falls in love in the middle of the Holocaust, and it's not a story you see every day, and she wants to know how you came up with the idea.
Well, as I mentioned originally, the idea really had to do with this Slovak woman, the Slovak girl who had helped the partisans. But the love story itself was just sort of of my own making. And let me say this. Many times in the books I write, for example, Commandant's Girl, you have these real-life things going along in very close geographic proximity to the Holocaust. So I remember writing Commandant's Girl, And there's a scene where people are at the opera. And then I was watching Band of Brothers, which I think is the finest thing ever put on film. And they were liberating one of the camps. And it was so graphic and so grim. And I thought, who am I to be writing dinner parties and nights at the orchestra when all of this was going on 60 miles away? And the answer I came to is these things really were going on 60 miles away. And the stories I'm telling are part of the bigger picture. So people really were falling in love as the war raged around them. And it really, those sorts of things, those sorts of daily lives, sisters really did have rivalries even in the middle of trying to survive. And so that's what I'm trying to show, all of the facets.
Excellent answer. Kyle wants to know, he says, you seem to be a World War II buff, and what fascinates you most about this time, and what prompted you to write several novels during World War II?
So my personal background is that having worked for the State Department in Poland for 2.5 years, where I really lived in very immediate geographic proximity to the war, in order to take my car to get fixed at the mechanic, I used to have to drive past the camp from Schindler's List,
Wow.
And my job took me to Auschwitz something like 50 times. So this was very deeply imprinted on my psyche. But even this is, I've been back from Poland 16 years later, and I'm still writing, and there's still more to say about the war. And it makes me think, what is it about the war that intrigues not just me, but us?
Right.
Because there's a whole group of people writing about the Second World War. And there's a lot of people who love to read that. And I've been thinking a lot about why. So let me offer a couple of thoughts, and I'd love to hear, others. But first of all, I think when communism ended in the 90s and there was suddenly this open flow of exchange and material between East and West, we had access to research materials and archives that we never had before, and that spawned a lot of stories. Yeah. The second thing is that, the generation of survivors is really getting up there in years, and there's this real drive, I think, to tell the stories, both fiction and memoir, while they are here.
Preserve it.
And the third part is, as a novelist, I think the war is such fertile ground. People had dire circumstances and stark choices, and those are the kinds of things that really allow you to put the reader in the shoes of the protagonist and say, what would I have done? And for me, that's some of what makes really great fiction, hopefully.
Yeah. Coming off of that remark about the protagonist, who was your most challenging character to write and why? Perhaps not the protagonist, I don't know.
So in this book, there's always sort of, there's one that's always a little less likable, but more interesting. So you have these two sisters, and you have Helena, and you have Ruth. And Ruth is a little tougher of a nut to crack, She's got a lot going on there. She's recently lost her fiance, and, she's a little more sort of protective and guarded, and she was definitely a hard one to get inside.
Mm-hmm. Brenna has a question about social media. She wants to know, how much interaction with your readers do you have, and do you use that as a means to chat with them on Twitter and Facebook?
Huge. I love this. So I think the greatest thing about the internet era is the ability for readers and writers to have a sustained, ongoing, and deeper relationship. So right. I'm not just talking about sending you an email once a year saying, hey, buy my book, or right. You throwing a review up on Amazon, which I love, but I'm not just talking about that. What I'm talking about is I have readers now that I've known for 5 and 6 and 7 years. And, so there's some readers I have on email. It's Pam Jenoff at Yahoo. There's some readers that a lot of people are on Facebook, right? So I have a lot of readers who like my page, or we're even Facebook friends, which is totally great. Also, Twitter. I've recently become very, very active on Twitter. I'm not that good at like Pinterest yet or that sort of thing, but basically Twitter, Facebook, and online. And I love to Skype with book clubs. So if you have a book club, I will Skype with any book club, and I will offer a free, I'll send a free copy of one of my earlier books to the book club just for Skyping. So because I think it's my honor to Skype with you. So I love the interaction with the readers, and please find me. And nothing is better than when I'm bleary-eyed and writing at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I pop on my computer and there's some message from a reader. Nothing is better.
That's awesome. Caitlin wants to know about your fall book list. She wants to know, do you have any books you're eager to read? Anything coming out in the
Oh,
fall?
I'm eager to read so many things. So one really interesting thing this year before the Winter Guest is I was part of a wonderful anthology that just came out. It's called Grand Central. And the premise of Grand Central is we have 10 short stories by women historical fiction writers. And all of our stories pass through Grand Central Station on the same day in 1945. So the stories are somewhat interwoven, like Love Actually, that sort of feeling. And it was a wonderful experience. And the other 9 writers were amazing. It was Jenna Blum and Sarah McCoy and Amanda Hodgkinson and Karen White, and just a really stellar lineup of authors. So one thing I really want to do is I want to get through, I want to get through their books. It is high on my list. And then, I'm excited about a lot of the big fall titles that are coming out. I've read some good things recently. Lisa Barr's Fugitive Colors was really, really good. I adore Lisa. I'm trying to think, but I'm starting with the Grand Central writers for sure this fall. The ones I haven't read yet.
Good to know. Rachel wants to know about the cover design. She really loved The Ambassador's Daughter, and she loves this cover. She wants to know how much of your creative input went into choosing the cover.
Thank you. I really love this cover too. So covers are an interesting thing. What I do is I give the publisher ideas when I'm working on a book, and they always ask for the ideas before the book is finished, which is really scary. Like, there's nothing scarier than talking about a book you haven't finished writing yet. So I'll give them themes, images, symbols, visual descriptions, and then they go off and do their thing. And I actually don't see the cover until pretty far along in the process. And then a couple things happen. If you have the magic cover, right, you're all good. Sometimes the cover may not be quite right, and that might either be my reaction or it could be the sales accounts, the bookstore's reaction. And there are times, including the Winter Guest, where they really care about getting it right, and they have said, no, this cover is not right, and they have gone back and completely redone it, and that was the case here, and I love this cover right now. The other really interesting thing that happens is you get duplication in covers, because a lot of publishers use sort of non-proprietary photographs. Photographs are images that are out there in the common domain, and it's not uncommon to have a book come out with the same cover as yours. And then depending, or similar cover, depending on if it's the same market and how far apart they are, you either keep it, you bite the bullet and keep it, or you go back and they start all over again.
Wow, that's quite a process. Bailey wants to know, if The Winter Guest became a feature film, what actors would you want to see play the main characters?
Oh, I haven't thought about it for The Winter Guest yet. I've been asked that many times for Commandant's Girl and for some of my other books, and I have not thought about it at all. Please email me your suggestions, because I have not a clue right now what I would say for that. I have not a clue. I mean, I don't know. I've always wanted to shoehorn Bradley Cooper into something I've done, but none of my books seem likely contenders. So
It's a tough question. There's a lot of different alternatives out there for actors and actresses.
Please email me with ideas.
You heard her, guys. So Brenna says, The Ambassador's Daughter was a huge success, and did you feel extra pressure to make this novel exceed your readers' expectations?
Well, I always want to exceed expectations. I always want to take it one step further and make it more what my readers want. I mean, it's always a challenge. So Ambassador's Daughter was one of the few times I've stepped away from the Second World War, because it was Paris Peace Conference, and I was nervous about that one. And The Winter Guest, is back to the heart of where I really write, which is World War II. So it wasn't really about one or the other. It's sort of about a fine line between what I want to say and what I think my readers are looking for. I'm not sure I've got the balance on that yet.
Caitlin has an interesting question. I don't think I've ever seen this before. Would you ever write for TV? Interesting.
Well, in my younger years, I was a big soap opera fan, so I had delusions of writing for Guiding Light. I would write. Let's say this: I'm a novelist. Like since I was 6 years old and wanted to write, it was always going to be novels. I don't write poetry, I don't write plays or screenplays. And when I was asked to participate in Grand Central, even writing a short story was a really huge leap for me because I had never done it before. So I'm pretty much a novelist. I mean, never say never. It's a really interesting question, but I can't even write, I only write adult novels. Like I don't even have the voice for a YA or new adult. So, but never say never.
Yeah, you never know. Gabriel wants to know, who do you think predominantly reads your novels, men or women?
I think it tends toward women, and I think but I hear from plenty of men who read them. Mm-hmm. But it's really a question of marketing, right, and placement. So when Commandant's Girl came out, I never, that was a very serious World War II book, and, Mira is owned by Harlequin, and Publishers Weekly called it historical romance at its finest. And we're going, romance? Like, I've never considered it romance, but I'm happy to be in the genre. It's not a problem. But I think my point is how it gets marketed and packaged definitely would gear more toward women, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. Emily J. says, Catherine Law, another author, was compared to you in a recent interview. Are you ever humbled by the fact that that people are categorizing you as an expert in your field and that your novels are unbelievably written?
Well, first of all, I have not seen the interview that I was compared to Catherine Law, so please send that to me. I'd love to see it. I Google search myself shamelessly, and I missed that one. So let me know. I'd love to see it. I'm always honored by the comparisons. Always. It's really it's interesting because I still feel so new at this and so inexperienced that even 7 books in, I still, I was asked in an interview recently, has fame changed you? Not famous. Hasn't changed me. But I mention that because most days I have to pinch myself just to even believe I get to write and that, I get to do this. So I would love to see that comparison.
So kind of going off of that, just about Googling yourself, Janet says, how do you react to criticism of your books, and do you try to avoid reviews, or do you read them?
I read everything. I read everything on Amazon, on Goodreads, on Twitter, on, if it's been written, I read it. So there, I think all of the feedback is good and it all helps. There are 2 kinds of feedback that are particularly, negative feedback, let us say, that are particularly noteworthy. One is, I do think sometimes the feedback perhaps from, I want to say aspiring writers, there's frequently this theme of like, why was this book published while so many other good books go unpublished? So that's one theme I see sometimes. The other one is historical accuracy. In this Wikipedia age, people love the gotcha. And no matter how many times I have a book proofed or edited or I show a scene in London to my British friends, I still hear about a million things that are wrong. Now, whether they're actually wrong or whether it's a perception of wrong is a whole other conversation. But that's a lot of the criticism, I think, also. So I read everything. I think it's healthy. And also, I teach at a law school, and one of the things I teach is writing. And I just said to my students this morning, I said, if you're nervous about me reading your work, just go on Amazon and read all the cruddy things people say about me, and you'll feel fine. So it's kind of a teaching tool also. But, you can't put yourself out there and not expect the feedback.
Right, exactly. Jay wants to know, what advice would you give a young author who wanted to write historical fiction?
Well, my biggest advice to any author, I always give the standard joke, don't quit your day job. And what I mean by that is that, I've always had the day job. It took me at least 5 years or plus to hit the shelves. And it's still a constant work in progress, this being a writer. So it's a very long path. You need to surround yourself with good people, find your writers group, find, things that will feed your creativity. But beyond that, I always have 3 very practical suggestions. 1, you have to be disciplined. You have to carve out your own time to write, because even after all these years, no one says to me, "Oh, Pam, go take some writing time." Like, you have to, you have to like really be protective of your writing time and say no to things in order to make that happen. Number 2, I think you have to be tenacious. And what I mean by that is there were many writers who were better than me in all my writing groups, you know? And what separated me and them is that I didn't stop trying. And when my first book got 39 rejections and didn't get picked up till 11 months later, my agent said, go write another book. And I went and I wrote another book, right? So my point being that to be just sticking in there, I think makes a huge difference. The third thing, most practically, is the ability to revise. You have to take other people's suggestions for your work, and they don't give you solutions, they give you problems, and you have to find a way to revise, and that is a hugely important skill.
Excellent. Let's see what we have next. We have so many good questions here. Tina says, if you could write with any other author, past or present, who would it be with, and what would you two write about?
Well, so collaboration is such an interesting thing. I will say, I think Grand Central was pretty much my dream collaboration. Grand Central was it, because we worked together, but our creative products were largely separate, and then we got to meet each other and have a killer launch party at Grand Central, and that was amazing.
Nice.
So I don't know. I don't know who else I would work. That's a fabulous question.
Amy wants to know about how long does it take you to write a complete book from start to end?
Generally, it takes me a year from start to end. So my process goes something like this. I have an idea. I sit down at my computer and I throw down like 150 pages of whatever comes out, like bad dialogue, all in different orders, narrative. It could be anything. And then when the document gets unwieldy, I have to stop, and I then have to, organize it, put in charts and outlines, and rewrite everything, which is a horribly inefficient process. I don't recommend it to anyone. It usually takes me a year, sometimes shorter, sometimes longer. This year was horrible because, one, what I was working on was very, very difficult, and second, those snow days last winter totally shellacked me. I did not work a full week between like Thanksgiving and April. So normally I finish a book right at Memorial Day, and now I'm finishing one right at Labor Day. So it takes longer this year.
Cabin fever will drive you crazy.
Yes.
Yeah. Amy wants to know, how do you deal with writer's block, and do you write every day, or at least try to?
I try and write every day. I'm not a long block writer. I'm what I call a short burst writer. I can't use 8 hours a day, but I can use 2 or 3 hours 7 days a week. I need that, those 2 to 3 hour blocks first thing in the morning, so I try and write every day. Writer's block, I'm going to say I don't believe in writer's block, and here's why.
I agree.
I was an attorney before, and if I had a brief that was due, I couldn't say, I'm just not feeling the muse, I can't write that brief. You just do it. And I treat writing in that sense like a job, and I believe there are things you can do to eliminate writer's block. So number one tip for me, at night, I read something, either a research book or something on writing or something that's relevant to my project, and I take notes and I make prompts, like a whole page of 20 prompts. And that way, the next morning, if it's 5 in the morning and I haven't slept because the kids were sick or something like that, I'm not starting from scratch. I just go from the prompts.
Good idea. Caitlin wants to know, what shows are you watching on TV? Any that you just can't miss?
Say that one more time. It didn't come up on the screen.
Oh,
sure. What shows am I watching?
Oh, yeah.
You know what? I would love more suggestions of shows. I have so few shows right now. So I just finished up with True Blood. Desperately waiting for the preview of Homeland, because anything with, Mandy Patinkin, Damian Lewis has me at hello. So really big on that. I love Downton Abbey. I watched the little 24 season they just did. But I would love some more ideas for shows, because I only have about one a week. And like that night with the popcorn after the kids have gone to bed is just my salvation. So email me some shows, please.
Awesome. Absolutely. Emily wants to know, is there any part of the story of The Winter's Guest that you would change? Interesting.
That I would change now?
Yeah, right.
It's
if you
too
could
soon,
publish it.
Yeah, no, it just came out, so I don't think there's anything I would change. No, I don't think there's anything yet. There's other things in past books, but this is too soon. Too soon.
Right. Jay wants to know, do you plan on tackling any other genres?
Genre is a really tough question because I don't write for a genre. I sort of write what's coming next. So let me give you an example. After I wrote Commandant's Girl and the sequel and historicals were going really, really well, the smart thing to do would have been to stay in genre. But I had a passion project that was more modern called Almost Home, and I shifted gears for a couple books. Now I'm back in the war. And sort of firmly back in the war, but it's not really a question of genre. It's just a question of whatever idea I'm taken with at the time.
Mm-hmm. That's a good way to go. Kyle has a question about the characters. He says, the characters are great in The Winter Guest, and you always do such a great job with them. How do you give them so much personality?
Thank you so much. I wasn't sure that I did. It's certainly something I struggle with, is how to give your characters depth. And I'm not someone who sits down and does like, oh, I'm going to interview my characters. That's not my system. I am much more of a, characters unfurl through the drafts and the writing, and through the note taking and sort of the thinking through the process and just getting to know them over the course of that year when I'm writing. I'm also totally into books on craft, right? So I have my key 8 or 10 books on writing that I really, really love. And when I'm wrestling with something, I might go back. So I might say, ooh, I don't know so-and-so well enough. And then I'll go back and maybe read something that'll help me develop it a little further. But it's more organic as the story comes to unfold. But thank you.
Let's see. Someone would like to know the best advice that you've ever gotten from a mentor or a peer when it comes to your writing.
Best advice from a mentor or a peer? I'd have to really think about that. But so I have a wonderful writing instructor who I started with a course in 2001, who I was in her workshop many years, and I can't say enough good things about all that she taught me. However, in terms of actual things that help me, I'm a big Natalie Goldberg buff. So if you've read Writing Down the Bones by Natalie Goldberg, she takes a Zen Buddhist approach to writing, and she has a free writing exercise where you keep your hand moving and you don't let it stop for a particular period of time. You don't edit or correct, you just write. And I think that's what really has influenced my approach of taking those 150 pages and throwing them down.
Excellent. Amy has a question about your favorite book to movie adaptation.
Book to movie? This is a tough crowd. Book to movie adaptation. I'm trying to think if my favorite movies really came from books. I'm not sure. I don't know. I'd love some suggestions, but I'm blanking at the moment.
No problem. It's a toughie. Let's see what Rachel has to say. She said, how was the novelist inside you born? And you've talked about your past background working at the State Department. So maybe talk a little bit about that. And maybe your travels in Europe, too. I'd love to hear about that.
Oh, sure. So I actually, they're sort of two separate stories, and I wonder if we're going to run out of time. But let me tell you how the novelist was born.
Sure.
I was always a kid who wanted to become a novelist. Never got started all through my years in Europe and school when I had plenty of time. Never got that dream off the ground. You know that dream I'm talking about in your own lives. I became an attorney after State Department 1 week to the day before 9/11 happened. And when 9/11 happened, I had a life epiphany called, Dear God, I don't want to die at the law firm. And what I mean by that was being a lawyer was a fine thing, but I hadn't lived my deeper dream of being a novelist. And if I had been a 9/11 victim, I never would have. So I took a writing course at night called Write Your Novel This Year, and I started working on my first novel. But I was a new attorney with $1,000 a month in student loan debt, so I couldn't go off and write in a castle. I used to write from 5 to 7 in the morning and then go to the firm for many, many years. That's what I had to do.
Wow.
So that's really where I was always the novelist, but it just took really wanting it and that epiphany to make it happen.
Oh, wow.
I can tell you about my travels, but I don't know or I can answer a different question.
Well, what are you working on next? We can talk about that. We have a question about what you're working on next.
I'm super excited. I'm turning in a book next week, and it's called Summer Boys, and it's set during the war, but primarily on the home front and in London. It's the story of an Italian Jewish refugee, Adelia. She's 16. She comes to America, and she promptly falls in with this Irish family with these 4 sons, and falls in love with the oldest son, which would be all well and good if America did not then enter the war with all of the complications that brings. So the Summer Boys will be out next summer.
Absolutely fantastic. That sounds great. We can't wait to read that too. And we just we want to say thank you again so much for joining us today. And to all our viewers, don't forget to stop by BookTrib after the chat to win a copy of her latest release, The Winter Guest. Thank you, Pam.
Thanks. Find me online. Thank you.
Absolutely. Have a great one. Bye.